Hi there. Today I'm back with another short story and I'm reading again from Hans Andersen's fairy tales. The story is called The Elf and the Grocer. Many of us who are adults may have often faced circumstances where we are faced with tough decisions, whether it be choosing a job or a field of study or quitting one to follow another. So if you've ever been there, you understand the conflict between the head and the heart that you have faced, or you may have to again. Before I begin the story, I want you to take a moment and think about the times in your life where you have had to make tough decisions, and how did you make that choice? Did you choose to be practical, or did you choose to follow your passion? And how did you deal with the consequences afterwards? Were you relieved, or did you regret your decisions? This story also talks about such conflicts within us, and it speaks of it in a rather relatable and simple and profound manner. So I hope you will enjoy this. I begin. Once there was a true student. He lived in the attic and owned nothing. And there was a true grocer. He lived in comfort on the ground floor and owned the whole house. And the elf kept well in with him. For every Christmas Eve, he would be given a dish of porridge with a lump of butter on top. The grocer could afford it, so the elf stayed in the shop and found it most instructive. One evening, the student came into the shop by the back entrance to buy some candles and cheese. He had no one else to send, so he had come himself. He got what he asked for, paid for it, and the grocer and his wife nodded to wish him good night. But her ladyship was a woman who could do more than nod. She had the gift of the gab. The student returned their greeting whilst he busied himself reading the sheet of paper that had been wrapped round the cheese. It was a page torn from an old book, which should never have been torn up. It was an old book full of poetry. There's a bit of it still left over there, said the grocer. I gave an old woman a handful of coffee for it. If you give me 8 shillings for it, you can have the rest. Thank you, replied the student. I'll take it instead of the cheese. I'll eat plain bread without cheese. It would be a crime to tear it all up. You're a fine businessman, a clever businessman, but you understand poetry as much as that bin. It was rather a rude thing to say, particularly about the bin. But the grocer laughed and the student also laughed, for after all it was said jokingly. The elf, however, was most upset that anyone would dare to say such things to the grocer, who was the landlord and who sold the very best butter. When night fell and the shop was closed and everybody except the student was in bed, the elf crept into the room and took the grocer's wife's gift of the gab. She did not use it when she was asleep. And whatever object the elf put it on in that room found its tongue at once and proceeded to express its thoughts and feelings just like the grocer's wife. But only one could have it at one time, which was a real blessing, for otherwise they would have all talked at once without being able to hear one another speak. The elf placed the gab on the bin where the old newspapers were kept. Is it really true, asked he, that you have no idea what poetry is? Of course I have, said the bin. It's something that usually appears in the papers right down the page and gets cut off. I think I can truly say I carry more of it in my interior than some students. Yet I am only a miserable bin in comparison to the grocer. Next, the elf placed the gab on the coffee mill. How it chattered on! Then he put it on the butter cask and on the till. Both were of the same opinion as the bin, and one should respect whatever the majority agrees upon. Now it is the student's turn, said the elf, and he crept silently up the back stairs to the attic where the student lived. The light was on inside. The elf peeped in through the keyhole. He saw the student reading that tattered book. But how bright it was in there! From the book came out a strong ray of light which grew into a trunk and then into a huge tree that towered high above, spreading its branches over the student's head. Every leaf was wonderfully fresh and every flower was the head of a beautiful girl, some with eyes dark and sparkling, others with eyes blue and crystal clear, and every fruit was a glittering star. And what wondrous music and beautiful singing filled the air! The little elf had never dreamt of such splendor, let alone seen or heard it. So there he stood on tiptoe like a statue, looking and looking till the light went out. The student had blown out the lamp and obviously had gone to bed, yet the elf stayed on by the door, for the soft, sweet singing carried on as a lovely lullaby for the student to drift to sleep. "How lovely it is here," thought the elf. "This I never expected, so I think I'll stay with the student." And he thought it over, very sensibly too, but then he sighed. The student hasn't any porridge, and he went downstairs again to the grocer. And just as well it was that he did, for the bin had used up nearly all of the grocer's wife's gab. It had told all that it ever had in it from one end, and was just preparing to turn round and start its telling from the other end when the elf came in, took away the gab, and returned it to the woman. The whole shop, however, from the till to the firewood by the stove, allowed its opinions to be guided from then on by the wind. Their respect for it was so great, and they expected great things of it, so whenever the grocer read aloud from his newspaper, the one which comes out in the evenings, the art and theatre reviews, they truly thought it was all being told by the bin. But the little elf no longer could bear to sit listening to all the shop's wisdom and common sense. The minute the light went on in the little attic room, he seemed to be pulled by the beams as if they were strong anchor cables pulling him upwards. He simply had to go up and peep in through the keyhole. There he felt the surge of grandeur, such as a man feels when facing the stormy seas, as God passes over it in the storm. The little elf burst into tears. He did not know why he cried, but in his tears was a touch of happiness. How beautiful it would be to sit with the student under the shining tree. But this was not possible. The elf had to be content with the keyhole. He went on standing there in the cold passage even when the autumn wind whistled through the trap door and it was cold, bitterly cold. Yet the little chap never felt it, not until the light went out in the attic room and the wondrous music died out in the wind. Ah, how frozen he felt then. He would crawl downstairs again to his warm little corner. It was snug and cozy here. And then, when Christmas Eve came with porridge and the big lump of butter on top, why then, the grocer was again his favorite. Then one night, the little elf was woken up by a terrible clanging at the window and banging from outside. The night watchman was blowing his trumpet. There was a fire. The whole street was lit up by the flames. Was this house on fire, or was it next door's? Where was it? How terrifying it all was. The grocer's wife was in such a state that she took her gold earrings off and put them into her pocket, so she would at least save something. The grocer rushed for his valuable papers, and the servant girl for her silk mantilla. She had earned enough to buy one. Everybody wanted to save their best things. The same applied to the elf. In a couple of leaps he was upstairs, and in the student's chamber, the student was standing quite calmly by the open window gazing at the fire. It was in the house opposite. The little elf seized the wondrous book on the table, pushed it into his little red cap, and held on to it with both his hands. The greatest treasure in the house was saved. Then he dashed away, outside onto the roof and right up to the chimney. There he sat, lit up by the glow of the burning house opposite, clutching with both hands the little red cap with the treasure inside. Now he knew where his heart lay and where he himself belonged. But when the fire had been put out and reason again returned to the little elf, well, then he said, "I'll split my time between them. I can't turn my back on the grocer altogether, if only for the porridge." And that was perfectly human. We also go to the grocer for the porridge. That was all. A short and sweet tale about balancing our heart's desires and our, the basic necessities of life. If you've ever been there and if you've ever had to compromise, I think we've all had to compromise somewhat to earn a living as well as follow our hearts. So if you've ever been there, do share your experiences in the comments. And if you've liked this video, if you like the story, then like the video. And I'll come back to you with another tale another time. For now, thanks for listening in. Goodbye.